Other black students held white faculty members hostage inside a classroom, even forcing them to ask permission just to use the restroom, when they would then be escorted by black students to the restroom and back. Evergreen State College in Washington is making headlines again, but this time, college officials won't be too pleased. The college famous for hosting a No White People Day is now staring down the barrel of a major funding shortage. It turns out white students resented being told they couldn't come to class that day, and enrollment at the school has plummeted. The school sent out a memo announcing it was expecting a 20% drop in new students this year, leading to a $6 million loss in funding. That's significant and is forcing the school to eliminate 24 faculty lines, as well as canceling openings for 19 vacant staff positions. Evergreen's Chief of Staff, John Carmichael, warned that another 20 staff members could also be let go, saying the layoffs are necessary to stabilize the school's budget. Many are pointing to the school's radical left-wing policies of banning white people from attending classes for an entire day as a major reason for the drop in new students. Last May, Evergreen took the unprecedented step of holding an official Day of Absence. It was intended to mark the contributions of black members in the community, with students of color voluntarily remaining home to show how their loss would be felt. However, it took a darker turn for many as black and other students of color were allowed to attend classes, but white students and faculty were asked to remain home. While the decision wasn't officially mandatory, it was in practice, and when former professor Brett Weinstein decided to hold classes anyways, students threatened his life and began hunting for him on campus. Weinstein says threats of violence from black students forced him to relocate his family in fear for their safety.
That the college descended into literal anarchy, and that for days the campus was not under the control of the state. It was under the control of protesters. That there were assaults, there were batteries, there was pressure not to report crimes to the police. People were, by the legal definition, I believe, kidnapped and imprisoned. That included faculty members and administrators. Others were hunted on the campus. That lawless bands roamed the campus unimpeded. Police were physically and intentionally blocked by protesters.
Other black students held white faculty members hostage inside a classroom, even forcing them to ask permission just to use the restroom, when they would then be escorted by black students to the restroom and back. Gangs of black students gathered together in groups around the school, raising their fists and chanting "Black Power," as well as other anti-white racist comments. Weinstein claimed there was a big difference between black students choosing to remain home and white students and teachers being told they weren't allowed to come to school. Many have said the event is no different than segregation, and saying it's disgraceful for a public institution that accepts taxpayer money to hold these kinds of racist demonstrations. Nevertheless, Evergreen doubled down on its social justice efforts, holding yet another Blacks-Only Day of Absence on May 16th, extending the event for a full 3 days. The event coincides with Harvard's recent decision to hold a No Whites Allowed graduation for black students. Georgetown University followed suit, holding a forum on racism and excluding any white people from attending. One can imagine the response if black people were excluded and only white students were allowed to attend a meeting about racism. However, as waves of students make their outrage felt by not enrolling in so-called progressive schools like Evergreen, perhaps other institutions will take note and avoid similar racist, segregated policies. But if white enrollment continues falling, colleges like Evergreen won't need to hold a day of absence because there won't be any white students left.
This video that sparked outrage
What did they do? What did they do? Did someone tell me what they did?
is now prompting change after these 2 black men were arrested at this Philadelphia Starbucks for trespassing after one asked to use the restroom without making a purchase. Starbucks is attempting to use that video as a teachable moment, creating this new training video.
The events in Philadelphia prompted us to bring 8,000 stores and 175,000 partners together on 529, because that is not who we aspire to be.
The company is shuttering all stores tomorrow afternoon for bias training.
Helping people see each other fully, completely, respectfully.
Workers will hear from the activist and rapper Common, watch a film, and break into smaller discussion groups. In the wake of that video, Starbucks now says anyone can use its spaces, including restrooms, without a purchase, unlike many businesses that enforce no loitering policies. And while Starbucks has settled with those young men, they told our Robin Roberts they want to see long-term change.
It's not just a black people thing. This is a people thing. And that's exactly what we want to see out of this, and that's true change.
A LGBTQ media advocacy group called for increase in movie representation. A new study from GLAAD showed lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people in films were at a 6-year low. The advocacy group released the annual Studio Responsibility Index, or SRI, on May 22nd. SRI found in 2017, out of 109 movies released by major movie studios, only 14 included LGBTQ characters. The report showed a drop from 2016, which saw 23 films out of 125 with LGBTQ characters. GLAAD urged movie studios to make at least 20% of their annual releases LGBTQ inclusive by 2021. They also called for 50% inclusion by 2024. GLAAD demanded characters be directly tied to the film's plot. They insisted LGBTQ characters should be featured fully and not left up to interpretation. Finally, with the popularity of superhero movies, they called for LGBTQ characters as heroes.
F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming is on the front line of America's nuclear defense, home to land-based nuclear-tipped missiles like these filmed by 60 Minutes in 2014. Each 20 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The airmen responsible for guarding these weapons are supposed to be on high alert. But in court-martial documents obtained by CBS News, details about a drug ring on base show some were just high, mostly on the psychedelic drug LSD. I absolutely just loved altering my mind, one airman testified at his court-martial. Another said under oath, I didn't know if I was going to die that night or not, and admitted he would not have been able to perform his duty in case of a nuclear security emergency. Between 2015 and 2016, more than a dozen nuclear-based personnel were found to have been abusing LSD and other drugs, including cocaine, ecstasy, and marijuana.
China's state-run Global Times reported that more than 11 million flights and 4 million high-speed train trips have been blocked by China's social credit system by the end of April. The system was introduced in 2014. It allows the state to collect massive data from an individual, including their financial behavior, traffic or public transport violations, and social network presence. A person's behavior is then scored, and if they're labeled as, quote, discredited, they will face multiple restraints such as being unable to fly or get on a train. Business Insider reported that other measures include controlling your internet speed, banning you or your children from entering good schools, and stopping you from getting jobs. Business Insider also reported that there is a list for good citizens who get more matches on dating sites and discounts on bills.
The meek may inherit the earth, but a bold preacher has his eye on the heavens, and he's asking his flock to get him there in style.
I really believe that if Jesus was physically on the earth today, he wouldn't be riding a donkey. Think about that for a minute. He'd be in an airplane preaching the gospel all over the world.
Televangelist Jesse Duplantis is hoping to take the word of Jesus to new heights with help from a $54 million private jet.
I've owned 3 different jets in my life, and used them and just burning them up for the Lord Jesus Christ.
Duplantis runs a ministry and church outside New Orleans. In a video posted to his website last week, he asked his followers for help funding the aircraft.
We're believing God for a brand new Falcon 7X so we can go anywhere in the world one stop.
Father, we thank you so.
Duplantis is not the first minister to preach the gospel of private flight. This past January, another televangelist, Kenneth Copeland, announced the blessing of a Gulfstream 5.
The prosperity gospel, which many of these ministers are preaching, is simply not the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Jim Wallace is the founder of Sojourners, a prominent Christian community.
The gospel of prosperity is a biblical heresy and needs to be named as that.
Christians of all stripes came to this summit asking, why don't believers do more to help their persecuted brothers and sisters around the globe? They hit at Christians in the first world living cushy lives with little thought for those under attack overseas.
We cannot claim Christ only to form our lives around the comforts and the conveniences of the modern Western life without paying mind to the injustice of the Christian persecution that we see around the world.
Many Christians are focused on what a friend of mine calls the 3 B's of good church life. Have you heard about them? The budget, the baptisms, and the building program. And if those 3 things are all in sync together, then the church is deemed to be successful.
The keynote speaker pointed out Jesus told Saul of Tarsus that Saul was attacking Christ when he attacked Christians.
When people persecute Christians, they're really persecuting who? Jesus. In the same way, when we care for the persecuted, we're really caring for Jesus. And that's why Jesus said, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me.
Spudo said he was once considering how much money to donate to starving Christians in Nigeria.
And the Lord whispered something into my heart that I don't believe I'll ever forget. He said, that's me. I'm hungry. And I'm waiting and watching to see who loves me and will give me something to eat.
Longtime defender of religious freedom, Frank Wolf, knocked believers' willful silence.
The church in the West can never say it does not know what is taking place in Iraq or the Middle East today. And Dr. Martin Luther King, to quote him again, said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Wolf then had a warning for America's Christians.
If the church slumbers, Washington will scarcely lead the way.
Sam Brownback is America's new ambassador at large for international religious freedom.
There's more persecution going on now than a number of authorities have said than any time in the history where we've had recorded history.
But he said governments that persecute believers ignore studies showing their nations will be less successful and more troubled.
If you want less terrorism, you need more religious freedom. If you want more economic growth, you need more religious freedom.
A teen encouraged fellow young people to learn about Christian persecution and get involved in fighting it.
A friend of my older brother's, he said it really eloquently. Awareness without action is not activism.
It doesn't require anything other than put one foot in front of the other and do what God says to do, and do it right now.
Just remember, we're here today because Jesus is still being persecuted through his children. And how we respond to them is really our response to Jesus.